session, the last session of today, is FABC 50 Years On, Negotiating Challenges and Seizing Opportunities. I request Professor Jonathan Tan to please come up. Professor Jonathan Tan hails from Malaysia and is Professor of Catholic Studies in the Department of Religious Studies at Case Western Reserve University, Cleveland, Ohio, in the United States of America. Professor Jonathan has written extensively on the FABC. Welcome, Professor Jonathan.
Thank you very much. Is there a way to show PowerPoint slides?
Professor Jonathan will speak for 40 minutes.
Let's plug this in.
If Professor Jonathan succeeds in finishing earlier, well and good, we might have more time for interaction. Welcome, Professor.
So, a very good evening to all the bishop delegates, honored invited guests. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you, to address this assembly. My presentation today is meant to be, the task I was given by Father Clarence Devadas was to look at the FABC 50 years from now. So what I have tried to do here is to discuss topics that were not really covered in this week. Some of the things I think that the Assembly could consider. The point here is this is not meant to be the only way or the only topics, but it's meant to add to what other speakers, other presenters have already brought up. And many of these things would probably not fit in a single document or in a single statement or even this. So it is meant for as a recommendations of points or issues or topics that the FABC could consider over time, gradually over the next 50 years at some point. So don't feel free to say that this has to go into the final statement next week. So when we talk about ressourcement is not just at the level of the universal church. Even for us in the Asian church, looking back at what our predecessors have done. So, I take what the OTC has did, the paper number 81, the spirit at work in Asia today. What is the spirit telling us? How do we, if you use the Ignatian spiritual exercises, to discern the spirits? I was reminded that 40 years ago in Bangkok, 1982, the Third Plenary Assembly, came out with this statement in Article 8.2, and the Asian bishops then were very prescient and prophetic when they talk about having to listen to the Spirit, talking about accompaniment and discerning the Spirit at work in Asia today. So I want to use that as a starting point for us to explore the next 50 years, back to the future. What is the Spirit telling us? Reading the sign of the times, as today's Mass reading was reminded us. Now, I've written a lot about FABC. Many of you have read stuff I've written on the FABC. So this is starting in the year 2000, my very first FABC paper that still remains, I think, one of the major works ever written on the theological methodology of the FABC, available in Gregorianum or FABC papers number 108. Now, I've written lots of stuff, and my second book, Christian Mission Among the Peoples of Asia, where I use the FABC's approach to mission to try to articulate a mission theology, a missiology, mission praxis for Asia. and this came out in 2014 by Orbis, and the IBMR named it as one of the 15 books in mission studies. So just to show you some of the, if you're interested in what I've done for the FABCs, so these are sources that you could turn to. And of course, I wrote this book to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the founding of the FABC, so published by Fortress Press and ISPCK, marking 1970 to 2020. And of course, for those of you, if you ever go to ISPCK's website, you can buy it for, I think, in rupees, it's only about US $3, $4. If you buy it, the US version is too expensive. So if you could get some of your Indian bishops or Indian friends or colleagues to buy from India and ship it, that's probably the easiest way where I talk about the FABCs, where I analyze documents and statements and Bishops Institute of the FABC over the last 50 years. Now, today's presentation draws on some of that work in this book, but it also goes beyond this book because the task given to me by Father Clarence is to look the next 50 years, what should we do? So in the first part, let's look briefly at Asia so that we are on the same page. My approach is going to be interdisciplinary, so theological, missiological, and sociological. We look at sociological data. Too often we do theology and mission uninformed by the kind of sociological, ethnographic data. And I think some of these data are revealing of things that we may not have spotted. So Asia, so I use the data from the Pew Forum. So when we look at Asia, over 100 years, the Christian population of Asia has grown. We know that. We know the other thing is, for the FABC to know that the Christian population of Asia is also very young compared to, say, Europe and North America, as you can see here. And if you look at countries with Asian population, we're looking as a quantity rather than percentage. We will see that countries like China, India, Indonesia have huge number of Asian populations. So just to give you an idea, rather than looking at it as a percentage, just looking at it as sheer numbers, by the year 2050, the country with the largest number of evangelical Christians based on current projections will be China, not United States, not North America. So these are things that bishop delegates, you have to take into account that this is a vibrant place. This is the center of mission, the locus where Christianity generally and Catholicism in particular is growing. Now, at the same time, we have talked about diversity. It's sometimes hard to visualize diversity, so I use charts from the Pew study. As you can see, Asia has almost 60% of the world's population. You look and see the number of Hindus, Buddhists, folk religions, other religions, and you can see Christianity compared to other places. So another, FABC will always have to deal with this diversity in a manner that, say, the Latin American bishops, Salem or Europe or North America don't really have to deal with, because this is part of our reality as church in Asia. Another way of looking at it, you look at Africa, Europe, North America, Latin America, with such huge population of Christians, they don't have to really think about diversity. For them, they could look at issues like environment, ecology, indigenous in a manner, because you can take for granted that Christianity will always be the majority. We can focus on that. We in Asia cannot run away from diversity with such a tiny population of Christians and with so many adherents of other religions. When we look at Catholics in Asia, in 1910 and 2010, the Catholic population of Asia has also grown significantly too, compared to elsewhere. But it remains very tiny, the Catholic population, as a share of the total population of the continent, as you can see in this chart. Now, I've identified the following 8 points that when we look at the contemporary context of Asia. In many respects, this is a summary of what other presenters have already been talking about. Very youthful, massive poverty, environmental degradation, and because of 1, 2, and 3, where local economies cannot sustain, there's immense migration, people on the move, highly diverse, many religions, hybridities, intersectional identities, issues of intercultural and interfaith families will always be something that we have to talk about. 7 and 8, I often think that we often don't pay enough attention to what people are doing at the grassroots, so popular devotions, popular ritual practices. This is true in Hinduism, in Buddhism, and it's especially true in Catholicism in Asia. And of course, finally, religious violence, ethnocentrism, nationalism, religious exclusivism in many parts of Asia. So something that we always have to deal with as church in Asia. Now, some key characteristics of Asian Catholicism, except for the Philippines and Timor-Leste, Asian Catholics will always be minority. And one of the things about being minority is we often don't get to dictate the conversation because the majority often dictates the discussion. And I've argued or analyzed this situation in the article I co-authored with Peter Fan. One of the things I think we don't often acknowledge enough when we talk about interreligious dialogue or dialogue of any form is to talk about the power dynamics, the majority-minority power dynamics in any dialogue or conversation. And I think sometimes our dialogue will be more fruitful if we understand those dynamics that sociologists have been talking about. Challenges of young adults and massive migration, because most of the migration are done by young people who have to support their extended families and have to look for employment elsewhere. Intersection between faith, culture, and ethnicity, something that Asian Catholics experience at a much deeper level because of all that cultural and religious diversity that we saw in the previous charts. Ongoing violence, of course, the quest for dialogue. Okay, so some of these ideas that I also present, when we talk about intersectionality and stuff, it's not just a secular idea of intersectionality that sociologists in the US and elsewhere have been talking about. Our Latino colleagues in the United States, when we talk about teologia and conjunto, and of course, talking about in response to the lo cotidiano, the daily lived experiences, where it is not just simply Latin American theologies, but a kind of theologizing and conjunto as Latinos in the United States. Now, let's start with the first point, migration. To just visualize, I think we hear a lot about migration, but if we look at the World Bank data, the most recently available World Bank data, you can see that 5 of the top 10 sending countries are in Asia. Something to remember. India, China, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Philippines, we all know this. And if you look at it visually, this is how the movement of peoples. Now, I want to use this as a case study when we talk about migration. What does it mean? Because when people migrate, they bring their religion along with them. So when we think of Arab Peninsula, Persian Gulf states, we always think, oh, this is a region of Islam. But do you know there are 2.5 million Catholics? So this is like the breakdown. When sociologists look at this region, how migration and religion intersect. Now, this is the data. Now let's look at it visually. When I show this to my students, they are mind blown because when you think the largest Catholic parish is not in Europe, it's not in the United States. No, it's actually in Dubai, St. Mary's Church in UAE. Officially 300,000 plus parishioners, unofficially about 500,000. You have up to 40 masses in 12 languages over 3 days, because Friday to Sunday, 80,000 hosts. So this is a typical example. This is a Friday Mass, because Friday is the holiday where you can have, the Muslims' holiday, so you also have to accommodate to that. Now, to give you an idea of how large the Filipino community is, this is Simbang Gabi. Simbang Gabi is like Posadas in Latin America. Simbang Gabi for the Filipinos, the novenas, the last week of Advent leading up to Christmas. Simbang Gabi 2014. There were just so many Filipinos, 14,000 plus, that they could not fit the church. The Simbang Gabi was in the car park, the parking lot, as you can see in these photos. So when we talk about migration in the abstract, yes, it is important to talk about trafficking, children, women, abuse, exploitation. But at the same time, we talk about, what are these people doing? How do we empower these people to witness? They are in a place where there are so many Catholics in the heart of the Muslim world. When you have 14,000 people Simbang Gabi every night? Do you get that in Philippines? So my colleague and I, Professor Catherine Gomez, Singaporean Eurasian Catholic, now teaching at RMIT in Australia, and me, using an Australian government ARC grant where we did fieldworks to look at migrants. Professor Gomez came out with this category of transient migrants, transient migration, transient mobility. Because when we think of migrants, we always think of permanent. These are refugees, asylum seekers making a permanent move. And this is true. Or we talk about migrants who are exploited, abused, like children and women who are trafficked. Yes, this is what NGOs and others highlight, and it is important that we do not neglect them. What I'm interested in, and some of you have brought up in your table conversations, is the silent majority that we take for granted. These are the educated ones. They can fend for themselves. These are the professional, educated folks who are middle class and above, the engineers, the doctors, the nurses, the teachers, the IT professionals, the international students, the people who move. They are transient because they may go to this country for university, they may work in this country for 5 years, another country for 10 years, somewhere else, and they retire in yet another country. Educated and professional, but they are the prime drivers of world Christianity globally. So the results of our study is published in, because the two sites we studied was Singapore and Melbourne. So Singapore is in Critica Cultura, the journal published by Ateneo, and the one in the Philippines is in this book. So what we have done is, when we interviewed about 88 respondents in Singapore, so this is the Singapore site, when we started, we did not ask them about religion, so we just want to see what did they say. More than one-third, without us prompting, identify as Christians and how Christianity helped them. What we are curious about, and this is very different, because what you hear from church, parish priests and stuff, is very different. These are transient migrants. They are transient. They often do not fit in, the local population. Very often they turn to Christianity as a means of coping. And this is true too of professional IT workers and stuff, not just, in other words, this demographic is a huge demographic that we don't really talk about. But, in Singapore, for example, 1/3 of the residents of Singapore are transient migrants. You take out the IT professionals and stuff from India and China and elsewhere, the Singapore economy will collapse. To give you some idea, Microsoft in the US, Redmond campus, 40% of Microsoft employees are Asian Indians on employment passes. You go to Silicon Valley, 2/3 of Silicon Valley in California, the heart of the US tech industry, are Asian migrants, primarily Indians and Chinese and others, on work visas. So Steve Bannon, Donald Trump's right-hand guy, in one of the right-wing rallies, will say, why are there so many Asians? Make America great again. Let's evict all these Asians. So one of the things we have to realize, is that, there is this educated group that we think can survive, but they also have issues. And many of them are Christians because Christianity, mission schools, English education go way together, as compared to, say, construction workers and stuff. So looking at this group, what we discovered when we actually interviewed them in field work that we gathered, that they hang out with other transient migrants rather than with the local. They go to church for Mass, yes, but when they actually group together, and I can tell this as a fact because I work with Filipinos in Singapore, they'll gather among themselves. Yes, they'll go to church for Mass, but then they'll have their own groups. In a similar study, now the next thing about transient migrants is the importance of online community. Now here, I want to go beyond just streaming and stuff, because even before pandemic and live stream and all that kind of stuff, the issues of migration and online communities have always fascinated sociologists. So this is, Agnes Brazil, which many of you may know in Philippines and elsewhere at Ateneo, in 2016, she and Randy Rodriguez had this very initial pilot study where they interviewed 8 Filipino Catholic transient migrants, 4 in Saudi, 4 in UAE, and how online faith communities in Facebook, WhatsApp, YouTube videos, how do they form community? Now, why is this important? So before we go to explore reasons, in our own study where we interviewed too, like for example, an Indonesian IT worker in Singapore speaks of his faith being nourished through YouTube channels with pastors and preachers. We see how transient migrants form communities on Facebook and Instagram, WeChat, WhatsApp, and others. And of course, in my own study, I'm now directing students since the 2020. Like last year, I had one of my students looking at emerging religious communities online. So she looked on TikTok and Discord. Now, if these things don't mean anything to you, ask the young people of your parish or diocese. They know what TikTok and Discord is. Now, here are the things to note. For me, as a missiologist, and looking at in terms of missiology and ecclesiology, our ecclesiology is constructed on what we call grounded geography. There's a physical building in geographical regions like the parish, the diocese. Now, what happens when you have online communities, virtual and online communities? Now, these online communities are real because for these migrants, being a migrant, you are what Victor Turner called betwixt and between. Marginal. The liminality of being a migrant is captured, experienced, and by being in solidarity with people like you. And how do you find people like you? Online. And I'm always reminded by what Cardinal Chito Tagle loves to say. Chito always tells, where are our young people? They're not in church. Then we should go where they are. If they're online, we go online to be with them, to accompany them. Now, why is this important? In Saudi Arabia, you cannot legally build a church. There are no churches in Saudi Arabia. And it's not a question of forcing the Saudi government, it's a question of national sovereignty and stuff. So what do? How do these 1.5 million Catholics get around the restriction on churches and no church, no priest? Because you cannot enter as a priest. If they catch you, they expel you. You get beyond the reach of Saudi law with an online church, online virtual community. Because if there's no such thing as an online community, as the study by Agnes Brazil and a colleague, the initial pilot study of 8 Filipino transient migrants in the Persian Gulf, There is no church. So what does it mean where they are increasing of all these folks and their own liminality as transient migrants demand that they cope as a coping mechanism. So when we talk about transient, it is not something positive. It may be to borrow a term from my Latino colleague, lo cotidiano. It's their lived experience, but it's still an experience in uprootedness, loneliness, and yearning for a home. It doesn't matter if you're earning $500,000 as an IT professional, you still have that loneliness. So Christianity, as I argue, my colleague and I, we argue in our study, plays a very important role. And it's something I think that whether FABC or the local bishop in your own dioceses or your clergy would have to address. Now, the other problem, in sociology, we talk about assimilation. These migrants should assimilate. In the US, the big problem, should migrants assimilate, stop speaking Spanish, speak English? The same thing in church. Do we expect all these transient migrants, they may be here on a contract, after their visa ends, they leave. And there's also challenged by their fellow Christians, assimilation is often not easy. In Singapore, I can speak from, at least in the Singapore context, every election, Singaporeans complain about too many migrants, and the government tried to accommodate by cutting the number of S visas, or raising this and that. So there is this tension. So transient migrants, by forming online communities, it also tells us something, that the assimilation model that they assimilate into local parishes may not always be the thing. It's not just in secular states. Now, I've written about online stuff as early as 2009, and you can look at this article that I wrote in New Theology Review. If you don't have access to it, CEDOS Bulletin is reprinted there. All right, intersection between faith, culture, and ethnicity. So Archbishop Julian Liao, this is your parish. I think when you were parish priest, Holy Family Church in Kajang. Now, sometimes, the best way to talk about faith, culture, and ethnicity is the Lunar New Year Mass. That's, of course, Father Harrison, who used to be the parish priest of this. This is in the Philippines. These are examples from Jakarta, Malaysia. Holy Family Church is the Peranakan Church. Peranakan meaning folks who are Malay and Chinese intermarried, so you can see in their dress. Holy Family used to be my parish church, because I used to live in that part of, in the secondary school when I was growing up, in Katong, Singapore. This is an example from the United States, ancestor veneration ritual. Bishop Ignatius Wang, the first Asian American bishop in the United States. And of course, this ancestor worship, for those of you who know mission history, was a contested thing. Rome banned it for several centuries before allowing it in 1939, Plana Competum Est, from Propaganda Fide. So never say never. Just because something is not allowed doesn't mean it's not allowed 200 years later. And of course, in case I be accused of being biased, this is in India, Institute Mater Dei for the CWRI. Because next week, Monday, we are going to celebrate Diwali or Deepavali in Tamil, Diwali in Hindi. So Monday next week is Diwali. So this is how the Mass for Diwali in India. The NBCLC's 42nd anniversary celebration, the Indian Rite Mass. Of course, we also remember the contribution of the late Father D.S. Amalopavadas. In the NBCLC, we explore intersections of faith culture in India. Now, my Filipino friends, the Misa Ng Sambayang Filipino, that finally got approved last year after such a long fight. So I'm glad you persevere under the new dicastery rules and stuff. That's only the start, because as you say, there are so many languages in the Philippines. This is from 2010, it's in Vincent's School of Theology. Vietnamese friends, you know this. Now, these are images from, I don't have images in Vietnam, so these are actually images in the US. On the left panel is Vietnamese Catholics in Chicago. On the right side is the Vietnamese at the Los Angeles Religious Education Congress. Now, popular piety and devotion. So basically, the points I make here is just a summary of what I make in my article below. Because when we talk about our Asian Catholics, it's not just the Mass, it's not just a church. The importance of popular devotions, that I think may have been lost in North America or Europe, but whether it's in the Philippines or it's India or elsewhere or Vietnam, it is very strong. So some examples. I mean, it's easy to talk about interior. So let me give you some visuals. Our Lady of Valankali. My students are always amazed that this is the largest Marian pilgrimage. Not Fatima, not Lourdes, not Guadalupe in Mexico City. India, where millions and millions go in September. Sri Lanka, the shrine of Our Lady of Madhu, very important because this is caught in the crossfire in the long-running civil war. It was attacked. It was a place of refuge, but it was also an important source of consolation for the Sri Lankan Tamil Catholics. Filipinos, you know this. Vietnamese, Duk Me Lavang, Our Lady of Lavang, and of course in the US, the Vietnamese diaspora, every August, the Marian days, Ngai Thanh Mao, where you have 200,000 Vietnamese from all across North America will gather in Missouri for this by popular devotion and identity as Vietnamese and Catholic intersect together in a manner that sometimes our American and European brothers and sisters don't often appreciate. This is in Australia. I was there, so I took this photo. Martyrdom. Martyrdom historically, as you know, Japan, Korea, China, Vietnam, but also ongoing, something the FABC always had to address, not just with outsiders in dialogue, but also as a question of justice with the victims of martyrdom and violence. So this is Orissa, India, and this is Sri Lanka, where you have not just the Tamils, as you see, the shrine of Our Lady of Madhu that was shelled in the fight between the Tamil rebel, LTTE, and the armed forces. Also jihadists in the Easter bombing of 2019. Dialogue, I just put it here so that it's a reminder, it's always something we need to talk about. These are some of the 5 points I think, this is actually from my book, so where I talk about how FABC's intersectional theologizing. Some of these things are pretty common. The one thing that from these 5 points that I'm going to highlight before I close my presentation is harmony with environment and ecology. Something we often never think about about FABC, but something that FABC has always been talking about. So for harmony, let's start with this Chinese character. It's also kanji and hancha and hanviet, he in Chinese harmony. I want to start with this because when the FABC talks about environment and harmony, the FABC links in the documents links harmony with the environment, with the broader picture of harmony. And I think the Chinese ideograph, on the left is the rice or the grain stalk. On the right, as you can see, is a mouth, so representing grain, plant, environment, and the mouth, human. So Bira 4:13, so 11. Because one of the things, when we talk about harmony and environment stuff, we always say, oh, it started with Laudato Si. I think how many of us know in the spirit of ressourcement that in the 1980s and 1990s, our Asian bishops have always been talking about it. And one uniquely Asian contribution that we as Asian Catholics can contribute to the conversation as part of Catholicity, the universal church, is how the care for the environment is so linked with a theology of harmony. So this is Bira 4:11. you can see how that how prescient it is, from the Chinese ideograph, the grain and the mouth, the natural and the human nature and environment coming together, that the harmony and the balance of the ecosystem is so tied in with this broader theology of harmony. And Bira 4:12, I think, reinforces this harmony with nature and harmony in human relationships go hand in hand. You cannot talk about harmony in human relations and harmony with other religions if we don't have harmony with nature. Asian Christian perspectives on harmony makes this same point too, that expanding on this understanding of harmony with nature, tying it, giving it an anthropocentric orientation. And finally, FABC 6 in 1995, the 6th Plenary Assembly, again, it talks about harmony and ecology. Notice 80s and 1990s, we have been talking about it. Then we forgot all about it. Then it got buried in the dust. I think in the spirit of ressourcement, when we look at the next 50 years, when we start with harmony, we should also look at what we as Asians, what we can contribute to the global church, the universal church, in the spirit of Catholicity. This is just a QR code. You can, the stuff that I quoted. If you want the articles or citations or full text PDF, you can scan it and look me up, or the web link is there. And I'm open to your questions. I think I fit in half an hour, right? Okay, thank you.
We thank Professor Tan for enlightening reflections that he has made on Asia, Asia's population, our rich religious traditions, and also on the rich documentation that we have of FABC. We already, so many years ago, we have been speaking about relationship with nature, ecology. We will just pause for a few moments of prayerful silence, and then we'll have some interventions. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. We could perhaps now have 8 to 10 minutes for some questions, clarifications, comments, any 2 or 3 interventions. Yeah, I can see Cardinal Joseph Coots of Pakistan. Mike, please. We will start with Cardinal Coots.
Professor Tan, thank you very much for giving us updated information in that part of Asia about which we have not talked about. 4.5 million Middle East, not Middle East, in the Gulf area only in that small area with these small countries like Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, Oman, etc. Now, it was way back in the early 70s that Professor Bullmann, a Swiss Capuchin, had written a book, The Coming of the Third Church, in which he beautifully brought out exactly this, saying the center of Christianity in the next few decades is not going to be in the West, but it will be in Asia and South America and Africa. And he also gave a demographic picture. But what Professor Tan gave us today is very revealing also. With this huge number of Catholics plus other Christians. But what I was expecting in this session was really we were talking about the way ahead, the future, FABC. Now, if we look back, I'm not sure when exactly, the documents are all there. We talked about the same thing. Now we're using the word synodality. That time the buzzword was a participatory church. Wendy is here, and there will be many others who will remember that. How much time and energy and lecturing and writing was done about having a participatory church. At that time, we took the methodology, the FABC theologians, from South Africa, the Lumko Center there. It was called the Lumko method. But then FABC adapted it, and we talked about the participatory church. And we had the FABC team going around to the various countries, trying to educate us, tell us about what kind of a church we want. And at the Asian Synod in 1998 in Rome, the document that came out, Ecclesia in Asia, the conclusion was the future of the church in Asia is going to be a participatory church. That was the key word, but there were other key words. Communion was there, be small basic Christian communities or ecclesial communities, whatever you want to call them. That was another buzzword that was being used. And we concluded the document of the Asian Synod by saying the future of the church in Asia is going to be a communion of communities and a participatory church, that whole method of getting away from that, the top-down kind of system, what we've talked about so much already. We are saying more or less the same thing in different words, thanks to Pope Francis and synodality. But have we really moved? I think we have a lot if we just go back those very fertile years of FABC, when the Office of Theological Concerns came out papers about how the church should be. Now, I was very struck when Professor Tan wrote the word harmony on the board. I became a bishop 34 years ago, in 1988. And a bishop always has to choose a motto. I didn't choose a motto from the Bible. I chose one word, harmony. And in the following decade, FABC came out with a number of papers on the theology of harmony. So really, I think where we should slowly be talking about now, we have these nice facts that have been given to us. But what is the way forward? We already talking about us.
Thank you, Cardinal Coates. Professor Tan will take one more intervention, and then you can respond. Bishop George. Bishop George.
I'm Bishop George from India. Thank you, Professor, for the very clear and very convincing presentation of the Asian situation. Some of the things that first thing I wanted to talk about also was about the ecclesia in Asia. But the Cardinal has already mentioned. But now, in your presentation, and in whatever we have been hearing over the last number of days, we know very well that in every country in Asia, we are a very small minority. Now, I would like to know your personal opinion about the numerical growth in the years ahead. What you think about it?
We'll take one more intervention, the Archbishop Simon Poe, and then Professor Tan will respond. Due to constraints of time, we will not take any more interventions. Archbishop Simon.
Thank you, Cardinal. I Thank you for the concept of harmony. I would like to go back to Asia as a land where we are the birthplace, cradle of cultures and religion. So in that area, two of the dimensions that will be moving forward a lot, as I see in the picture presentation, would be inculturation. It can be in the language, it can be in the worship, and in all aspects. That means it has to be the church grounded on the culture of respective soil. But the other area, I think the contribution of Asia to the universal church should be in the inter-religious harmony. I was talking with, I was very impressed by Bishop David Ambo, his presentation. We talk about that, the concept of a yin and yang, that is a very famous Confucian Taoist concept that puts things in harmony together. And so I think that concept of the harmony is something that we can contribute, because there is a tension between religion, various religions and culture where we are living, and that is precisely where we are in Asia. And if we believe that we can live in harmony, there is something that we can contribute towards the universal church. The concept, as Puebla Selam has given, the BEC concept, and the social dimension of the church, I think the Asian concept, Asian contribution will be on inter-religious harmony, something that is very unique to us by the very fact that we're minority living among various cultures and religion, and that is precisely Asia. So how would this be coming across as our way forward as a possibility? And we are able to live with that. I like Cardinal's Holeric. We are living within that tension and yet finding the way of harmony forward. So it's something that I believe can be done, but how do we actually put it down and not just let it remain in word, and it remains only in documents only, as Cardinal Coates have said, that it ends up with more paper, but how do we actually live it out concretely as something different? So that is where I think I'd like to present back to our professor a response on the way forward for the future for the Church of Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, Archbishop Simon. Professor Tan, can you briefly respond to these three interventions?
So for Archbishop Paul, and you just took the words, what I actually wrote in the preface of my book, because one of the things I think we forget in FABC is when FABC, like any other federation, issues documents, it's not just for the region like Asia, but it's also because in the spirit of Catholicity, it's for the universal church. Just like how we study Selam documents in North America, I'm always encouraging my colleagues in North America, both at the USCCB and elsewhere, and to look at FABC documents the way they look at Selam documents. So next month, there's a conference coming up where I'm on the panel to provide the Asian response to the Amazonian Synod. I hope I can persuade my colleagues down the road to have a response, a panel studying the final statement from this assembly. In my introduction to my book, the one that looks at the 50 years of FABC, you took the words right from my book itself, where I say that the one thing, if Selam contributed the liberation, and of course now with Aparecida and with the Amazonian Synod, indigenous and environment, what can we contribute is how do we attend to the challenges of religious diversity and pluralism. One of the problems in Europe and North America is the rise of right-wing fundamentalism, anti-immigration, anti-this, anti-that, because as you saw in the chart, these regions have always have a dominant white Christianity, and they do not know how to deal with migrants coming in with diversity of cultures and religions and traditions. So whether it's an alternative for Deutschland or Marine Le Pen or whatever in Europe, or Donald Trump, make America great again, these are all last gasp attempt at trying to defend the normativity of Christianity generally and white Christianity. So what and the sad thing is, you know, the majority of white Catholics in the United States are pro-Trump. And of course, this leads to a challenge. So what we can do as the Church of Asia, how we can contribute is there is an alternative. We as Catholics living in lands where we are religious minorities, but we are thriving, even in the Middle East, even in the Persian Gulf states, we have shown that we can get past restrictive laws on no churches and stuff, and we can still grow despite persecution and bombings and whatnot. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, as Tertullian says. So what can we show? How do we survive? How do we cope? Our resilience in the face of all these challenges and our ability to get beyond violence, to promote harmony, that we can contribute to the global church, the universal church. So, and of course, Cardinal Coates, what you have said, you know, again, is a point that I made over and over again in my book. You know, in the spirit of ressourcement, many of the things that Pope Francis are saying now, the Asian bishops have said a long time ago. The OTAC and then later on the OTC have said a long time ago. All the various bishops' institutes have stated a long time ago. This is nothing new. You know this, I know this as someone who has studied the FABC for more than 20 years. The question is, how do we retrieve that? And this is something I cannot answer. It's something that I think the Federation, the bishops' conferences, the individual bishops, how do we have all this hard work done by everyone, a participatory church, the various BISA cycles and all, I mean, they are all there. It is time, I think, the next 50 years, sometimes ressourcement, like Pope John the 23rd, doesn't mean that we start looking for something new from Europe or from Rome or Pope Francis. Sometimes we already have done it. And not only that, we can also, in the spirit of what Archbishop Simon Poe has said, offer it to the universal church. The way Salam offers up new ways of dealing with indigenous and environment. You know, we should not be shy about our gifts, our talents. We do not hide the lamb under the bed. We put it out so that the world can see. And to Bishop George, what do I see as a future of, you know, the next 50 years personally? Personally, this is in no way me telling you what you should write in your document. I think that we have to, in my own writings, I've written on the need to go beyond tradition maintenance to what I call traditioning. And it's not traditioning is not a paradigm I invent. Traditioning is a paradigm that my Latino colleagues had invented, because being Latino is not maintaining a Latin American identity, but creating a new identity. So in a spirit of traditioning, we have to explore new ways. The church is evolving. It's not static. Instead of lamenting of secularization and we are losing people in migration, we should look for opportunities and what the Spirit is telling us. If young people cannot survive in this country, and even as professionals, IT professionals, they have to go to Silicon Valley, or they have to go to the Middle East, or they have to go the United States to earn a living, then, you know, we have to think of what it means to be Asian. One of the things I think the FABC has always been limited to the geographical, whereas me as an interdisciplinary scholar who looks at theology and at the intersection of theology, missiology, and sociology, what does it mean to be a transnational Asian? We talk about transnational identities, global. So how do we minister to the humongous Asian diaspora? You know, if most of our Kerala Catholics are working in the United States, how do we include them? How do we connect them? Modi does a very good job of trying to connect overseas India. Why aren't we doing something similar? Xi Jinping does the same with China, trying to encourage overseas Chinese to look at Mother China and not all the kind of stuff, and doing all kinds of things to convince them to reclaim a Chinese identity. Not always successful, but they are trying. There are lessons to be learned. So one of the things that I wanted the FABC to think, yes, we should address issues of trafficking, abuse, exploitation. Yes, we cannot neglect that. But we need to also think big picture missiologically. Our people are not going to be in Asia. Our people are going to be all over the world, because Asia, we cannot provide enough opportunities for them to remain here. How do we address Asians across the world, around the world? How do we reach out to them? How do we ensure that they connect with us? How can we, using virtual and online technologies, create new platforms, new ways of constructing an intersectional Asian and Catholic identity as in the diaspora? How do we address issues of the challenges of religious diversity and pluralism, which is always not often happy? That's why we have harmony. How do we respond to create new relationships? How do we address victims, whether they are Tamil Catholics or whether they are in Pakistan or elsewhere? The core justice also means that we also need to find ways of working with the victims of violence. How do we deal with that? How do we break boundaries? How can the church ultimately be prophetic? I cannot tell you what to write. What I can tell you is to lay out the issues, lay out some ideas, and hopefully the Spirit will move you, the assembly, in a spirit of synodality, communal collegiality, the traditional Orthodox idea of synodality, where the synod teaches, so the idea that you can come up with something that is truly inspiring, that my colleagues in the United States and Europe would love to study the FABC statement from this assembly, the way they are looking at, so excited at the Amazonian synod documents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Tan, for your thought-provoking reflections and enlightening insights on how to negotiate challenges and seize opportunities, FABC 50 years on. Thank you to you and to those who participated in the conversation. I request Professor Tan to kindly come to the middle and accept our token of appreciation and gratitude from the hands of our President.